Okay, so this is session 2 in the book reading of It Starts with Food by Melissa and Dallas Hartwig. What we discussed last week, a quick recap of the 4 good food standards that they explained, that the foods that we eat need to have, firstly, a great psychological influence on us. Secondly, it needs to have a positive hormonal response in our body. Third, it needs to agree with our gut. And fourth, it needs to reduce the inflammation in our system. And if the foods follow these good food standards, then they are generally considered to be good quality foods. So those four good food standards is what we discussed. Then we started talking about the first good food standard, which is about the psychological influence of the food on us. What we discussed was that, yes, we know the dieting doesn't work, but we also need to understand that it's not because we don't have willpower. It's not our fault. It's actually a very strong reaction or impulse that these foods bring out in us, which we call food cravings, an intense desire to consume a particular food that is difficult to resist. So it's not just about your behavior related to the food, but it's actually to do with our emotional motivation and the conditioning, the habit, the neuro patterns that we have practiced and created again and again with repeated satisfaction. That is what we call cravings today. So this is interesting. In the ancient world, when we were, let's say, think back to hunter-gatherer times, our brains and our biology was wired for us to understand 3 types of tastes, okay? We knew that if we found something in nature that is sweet, then it's definitely safe for us to consume, and it is a source of energy. We knew that if we came across something that is fatty, it's going to be a dense source of calories for us. So it's going to give us slow absorption fuel for a long period of time. And if we came across salty foods, we would have it in small quantities purely as a means of conserving fluid, especially if water was not easily available. So these foods were not really designed to tell us that, oh my God, this is delicious or this is not so tasty, but it was meant to be nutritious for us, nutritious rather than delicious, okay? So in nature, our pleasure and our reward signals would lead us to nutrition, not taste necessarily, but nutrition. Now, what's happened today is that the ancient signals persist, but the foods that relay them are anything but good sources of nutrition. So the foods are not actually good sources of nutrition. You can see examples of that all around you. Like I was just discussing last time, how we have stores of chains of food that have come up of packaged so-called healthy snacks, which are refined food-like products, which no longer look like anything like the plant or the animal from which they were derived, okay? So what the companies have done is they've taken out the water, the fiber, the nutrients, then they have reinforced it with artificial supplements, artificial vitamins, minerals, using seed oils, using artificial sweeteners and colors, and especially the flavors. So they've actually turned these foods into what they call Frankenfoods, like Frankenstein, okay? And what these foods do is that they light up our pleasure and reward centers in the brain for a different reason than nature intended. So they are scientifically designed to stimulate our taste buds. And the effect of that is a total disconnect between what foods give us pleasure and rewards and what foods are actually nutritious, which ideally should go hand in hand, but they actually don't. So if you were to think about foods in nature that are sweet, okay, you would obviously think about fruits. And from sweet fruits to watery fruits to citrus fruits, the whole range, but essentially fruit. If you think about any foods that we consider which are not food, but which are not fruit, but they are sweet. What are the examples that come to our mind? It's sugars, it's sweeteners, it's all our, additional sweeteners, even including, jaggery or versions of the sugars that are consumed. So we would think of sweet tastes from coming from those sources rather than just fruit. In nature, if you were to think about fatty foods, you would think, I mean, the most obvious one is animal fat because it is what hunter-gatherers ate. But apart from that, in vegetarian, you would think about nuts, which are dense source of calories. The same thing, if you were to consider in today's fast food world, we would buy butters and cheeses and this is the healthier stuff I'm talking about. Even our oils, we would go to our safolas and our refined seed oils, etc., and think that, okay, I'm adding fat to my food by cooking it in oil. So again, it's a complete disconnect to what would have been fatty tastes coming in nature to something that is artificially created fat. Again, when we're talking about salty foods. So in nature, salt would just come from the shells of things, okay? If it was the shell of a cashew, or if it was seafood, which would give us natural salts. Anything that came from the sea would give us natural salts. But in today's world, we are either adding salts, and of course, we are trying to pick the best organic rock salt, etc., etc. But we are essentially adding salts, and we're trying to eat foods that are preserved in salt a lot as well, like our achars or, the fast foods that we sometimes eat at our so-called 4 o'clock snack. So we are actually eating more calories with less nutrition. Okay, persistent biological signals lead us to overeat the sweet, the fatty, and the salty foods. But at the same time, we are actually malnourished. Why? Because these foods that we're choosing are calorically high, but nutritionally very shallow, and therefore malnourished. These foods are also cheap to produce I would not say so much in India. It's actually probably more expensive to buy processed foods, but because we can all afford to buy it and we love the convenience factor, which comes from the lifestyle of supported help and so many helpers that we have created for ourselves, that it actually becomes easier to go to the processed health food option rather than the natural sweet, salty, or fatty foods. So, a supernormal food stimulus arouses our taste receptors more intensely than anything found in nature. So you'll surely agree that the sweet in a mithai or the candy, not many of us eat candy, I know, but let's say a good mithai, which is made with good quality sweeteners like jaggery or dates, but which are still really dense in sweetness. Or let's say if we go and eat onion rings or, starters, especially vegetarian starters in a restaurant, or in meat, sweet and sour pork. Again, not so common in our households, but let's say biscuits or something which is a quick go-to food when we are hungry and it's easily available. So the reason why we prefer them is because they outcompete any taste that is found in nature, which is exactly why we prefer them. So the over-the-top flavors that are found in these foods and the extra strong connections that they forge in your brain make it really hard to stop eating them and make natural, wholesome foods look bland, boring by comparison. And that's the impression that we keep giving ourselves that, oh, ghar ka khana, bland, boring. Okay, especially, okay, I'm eating out, so I need variety. The problem isn't that these foods are delicious. The problem is that these foods are supernormally stimulating in the absence of nutrition and satiety. So they are the essence of empty calories. That is food with no breaks. Okay. So I want you to, while we're talking about the next section, think about some of the fast foods, or when I say fast foods, I really mean also our homemade snacks, the foods which are dry that we tend to reach to, which make us feel, either we get cravings for, or they make us feel satisfied. So some examples that I thought of was, I know many people have things like khakras or biscuits, soya chips, cookies, even if they may be healthy cookies like oat cookies made with seeds and nuts, or of course I spoke about bhels and chaats, or the dry kurmuras, the rice puffs, which are with a tadka with seed oil, for example, or of course the more sweeter bakery products like chocolate croissant or a chikki or a mithai, or some of these healthy snacks that people are selling, and they are quite popular, like your little date chikkis and all of that kind of thing. So think about these foods. The book talks about the example of prime ribs versus Oreo cookies. Not many of us eat prime ribs. Neither do we indulge so much in biscuits unless we're much younger, etc. So I want you to think about these other options. And instead of prime ribs, if you are vegetarian, think about a simple ghar ka meal, which is either khichdi and vegetables, or dal, rice, khichdi, bhaji with ghee. Okay, so let's say a meal that has a complete protein in it. Usually the combination of dal, rice, vegetables with some ghee has more or less complete protein, with more proportions of dal and sabzi. Or if you're non-vegetarian, think about a meal which is roast chicken and vegetables, or grilled fish and a salad and a soup with some fat in it. Okay, so think about those kind of meals when we're talking about prime ribs. And for the biscuits, think about all of these other options. You think about your emotional connections as to what are the foods you go to. Okay, so let's understand the concept of satiety and satiation. They sound the same, but biologically speaking, they are very two different concepts. Satiety occurs in the digestive tract, so in your gut, in your intestines actually. When you've digested and absorbed enough calories and nutrients to satisfy your body's needs, then the body gives a hormonal response, which actually tells your brain that, you know what, I'm well nourished for now. Okay, so one cannot fool satiety, one cannot fake it, one cannot crave it. It either is or isn't. But what happens is, for the message to come from the intestinal tract to the brain, for our cells to comprehend it, takes time. And these signals can sometimes take a long time. Okay, it may take several hours to be transmitted. So satiety by itself cannot stop you from overeating on a particular food in that moment. It cannot stop you from it. Okay, so this is where satiation comes in. So satiation is regulated in the brain. Through certain signals, it gives us a timely motivation to stop eating. So what are these signals? It's based on the taste of the food, the smell, the texture, the amount of time that it takes us to chew for the signal to go to the brain, of all of these qualities of taste, smell, texture. So this is how we perceive a sense of fullness, using our comprehension, using our rational mind, because we know, okay, we've consumed these many calories in this meal. Okay, it tastes like this. How am I feeling as I'm chewing it? So you're constantly in a dialogue with your brain, which is giving you feedback, telling you, okay, this is delicious. Okay, I'm full now, etc. So you get my point. Now, unlike satiety, satiation is an estimate. Okay, it's dependent on your perceptions. It is not an absolute measurement. Now, your perception will often come based on how mindful you are at the time that you are eating that meal. So if you're eating your meal watching TV, if you're eating your meal on the go at work, even chatting with a friend on the phone while you're eating, what's happening to these messages? What's happening to your perception of your satiation? that the food is bringing out in you. It's quite poor, right? The quality of satiation will be poorer as opposed to when you're eating, giving your meal full attention, maybe in silence or with a little bit of nice social company. You will get stronger signals of fullness, and therefore the message of satiation will reach you earlier and stop you from overeating. Okay, so again, over here now, if you think of a home meal like roast chicken and vegetables, okay, complete protein, most satiating of all the macronutrients, naturally occurring fats that comes from, let's say, animal fats, or it comes from your ghee in your dal rice, etc. You'll find yourself eating a decent sized portion for yourself, and then you'll say, okay, I'm full. So that's the satiation signal, which is telling you that, okay, I don't want any more. This food will take longer to eat than processed food because you're going to chew it for a longer period of time. You have to swallow. It gives your brain a chance to catch up with your stomach as well as with your taste buds. Okay, so you're able to absorb the nourishment from that food without overeating it at the cost of the taste buds taking over. Now, when we are actually then getting nourishment, the brain gets a signal saying, okay, I'm full, and that's satiety. Now, this scenario, let's see how this plays out differently for foods which are lacking the satiation factors of adequate nutrition. What are these factors? That it's a complete protein, it has natural fats, and it has all our essential nutrients, the macronutrients. Okay. Now, let's say that if you're eating something which is extremely processed, 4 o'clock, you got home from work or from running your errands and you're hungry and you picked up a bag of, let's say, soya chips or a chicky, or you tried, or you sat with a bowl of kurmura or, something like that, or a bhel or whatever. Now, with these foods, there's almost no protein in them. There are no saturated fats. Anything that is added is giving you flavor through a artificial chemical, flavor enhancing chemicals, okay, or added fats. So you will have to use willpower to say, okay, I've had my nashta. Now only this much is good for me. I know I shouldn't overeat this. And then every once in a while, you won't be able to stop yourself and you'll finish the packet, or you'll overindulge in it. Because so you understand that we are, even though we've eaten plenty of calories, our bodies know that we are still seriously lacking in nutrition. So we continue eating because satiety cannot be fooled, especially when you are hungry. So we actually only put it away when we realize that, okay, we're either going to be sick, or we use a lot of willpower and stop ourselves and put forced breaks. So this processing removes any nutrition once found in the food, but still leaves all the calories. So if you think about all those examples that we spoke about of our home snacks, they have a lot of calories, even though they may be sold to you as low fat and etc., but they have a lot of calories, but very poor nutrition. So we are consuming the calories, but still not feeling any satiety because the digestive tract is not giving us, the intestines and not giving the brain the message that I am well nourished. So you will, after eating all of that, you will then go and eat a good sized dinner because you need the nourishment. And overall, what has happened? You basically consumed a lot more calories than you actually need, but nourishment is okay. So chronic consumption of these foods doesn't just affect our taste buds, our perceptions, and our waistlines, but they actually literally rewire our brains. So let's talk about the connection of pleasure, reward, emotion, and habit. They're all interconnected in our brains. So the reward circuitry is integrated with parts of the brain that enrich a pleasurable experience, link it to emotion, therefore make it that much more powerful and that much harder to resist. Easier to remember, harder to resist. This pushes you towards rewarding stimuli. So food follows exactly the same pattern. When we are thinking about certain foods, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter which is associated with the pleasure center. This motivates our behavior and reinforces the food-seeking, wanting habits. It energizes your feeling. This is the time that we are telling ourselves all kind of reasons as to why that calorie-dense food is also nutritious. Why something that we're opening out of a packet is still going to be fine. We're kind of fooling ourselves. We're telling ourselves all of these things. Brain, then when you start to eat it, the brain releases opioids. So endorphins, body's own feel-good compounds, which also have a rewarding effect. This brings pleasure, emotional relief. It releases our stress, especially, let's say, if you're a student, if you've had a hard day of work, if you have a deal going on, you're into corporate pressure, or you're just managing a lot of people in the household, okay? That has its own stresses. And then eating these foods helps you go like, okay, stress-free for that little period of time. Why? Because endorphins released give you a little bit of a high. So the dopamine pathways begin to light up at the mere suggestion of the food. So for example, you start looking forward to it, okay? If your typical habit is to get home in that evening time or to sit down in the night after everyone has gone off to sleep and, you're able to relax, that is the time that you are the weakest mentally, and those pathways, dopamine pathways, begin to light up at the mere thought of, oh my God, I'm bored. I feel like a treat. I worked so hard. I've had such a tough day, etc. So now your want has turned into a need because you have told yourself why you need this snack, why you'll only have one, why it's just something that is within your control. You don't even have to be hungry because it's actually not about satisfying your hunger at all. It's about satisfying your craving. How have these cravings developed? Because your memory circuits have told you that you will get happy when you eat a certain food. So the reward circuits, memory circuits, all link together. And therefore, the vicious cycle serves to reinforce itself until you have developed a habit. Okay, so you can develop all kinds of habits, as we all know. In this case, you've developed a habitual response to even the thought of those foods. You've often obviously heard that many people eat a lot when they are stressed. We have teenagers who are training with us who are in the 12th grade, and within a year, they have just their body shape has changed. They are extremely stressed. Or kids who have gone overseas to study, or in the first year of college, a lot of changes in life, etc. And they are constantly stress eating, constantly. But why? Because it helps them relax. The trouble is that chronic stress, whether it comes from anxiety or worry, from lack of sleep, from over-exercising also sometimes, or poor nutritional habits, or in most cases of regular people around you, it's lack of exercise, poor sleeping habits, and a certain amount of stress in their life. So that is driving us to overeat. Understand that when we say overeat, we are also relating it to how much we work with our bodies. And if you are not the kind of person who's very physically active for the rest of the day, even if you're exercising in a gym, it's a very fine line between consuming too many calories versus, staying under that overeating model. Stress affects the activation of reward pathways, impairs your attempts to control your eating habits. It makes it even harder for us to resist our cravings. Okay, the urge to pleasure eat is strong. You're far more likely to overeat. It causes you then to change the type of foods you eat. So everybody would agree with me that when you're eating your lunch in the middle of the day, when you have an active day, you are much more likely to make food choices which are more complete in protein, balanced in fat, and energy, as opposed to late at night when your guards are down, when you are wanting to be released of certain amount of stress. And that's when you're likely to eat sugary, salty, fatty foods. And therefore, dopamine opioid pathways in the brain We feel stress, we eat those foods, we feel better. So what are we doing? We're promoting the encoding of these habits. So stress eating can promote habit-driven overeating even in the absence of active stress. Why? Because when you are constantly exposed to stress, or so you tell yourself, and you create those eating patterns, then even on a day when you're not stressed, even on the weekend, let's say when the stress of Monday to Friday isn't there, you will still make those same choices, because the link in our brains with feeling better, with feeling pleasure, is already associated with those certain foods. So your wanting for them becomes stronger and stronger. The stressed brain expresses a strong drive to eat and an impaired capacity to inhibit eating. This is very important. So it's not just about, oh, I crave that food. It's about my resistance to not eating that food has actually reduced. So let's say that you have social events or social gatherings for which you feel obliged to go out of a cultural need. And then you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to go there, but I'm only going to have that little bit, or I'm not going to touch anything that is in these category of foods. But if you are used to and indulging in those categories of foods even once in a while, 99 out of 100 times you will end up eating some of those foods. Why? Because your capacity to inhibit eating them has also become impaired through these habit loops that you have set up. So you kind of feel that your ability to not eat is impaired. You actually have to eat it. Of course, we can't always eliminate stress in our lives. That half of the equation may be here to stay. Our only recourse is to concentrate on the other half by eliminating the foods that play into this unhealthy stress response. So the point is to understand that these unhealthy foods are actually really hard to give up. I think for us Indians, or even, our members, we also need to take one step back and actually understand that our capacity to identify unhealthy foods is also really impaired, where we have, from what I hear from my conversations with members at the gym, etc., that it is become so hard to convince, like we have all convinced ourselves that some of these so-called fast foods are actually healthy foods. They are healthy snacks. And because we have convinced ourselves that they are healthy, they are actually even harder to give up. Because we say, oh, what can be so bad about kurmura? What can be so bad about a healthy cookie? So we have convinced ourselves that these words, by associating the healthy word around it, we are eating it as a coping mechanism instead of from hunger. The misuse of biological and natural cues, our modern technology has made these foods supernormally stimulating. Okay, we've gone through this, and create an artificial demand for more. So now, how do we appreciate the natural, delicious flavors which are found in whole foods? So that's our first goal. And that's the most challenging part, that how do we appreciate the foods that actually give us satiety signals, that actually give us satiation signals as well, because of the way that we are consuming them. The fact that we have to chew it longer, we have to feel, taste, not drink it down, not gulp it down. So, and secondly, the pleasure and the reward you experience when eating that delicious food will once again be closely tied with good nutrition, satiation, and satiety. So you'll be able to stop eating because you know that you are full. And that's the time when you will not be controlled by the food that you're eating. So the summary of the psychological influence, foods that give us a strong, promote a healthy psychological influence, are what foods? Sweet foods. So understand, sweet foods are not bad. Salty foods, not bad. Fatty foods, not terrible for you. It is the ones that are promoting a certain signal to the brain, which were designed in nature to give us nourishment and nutrition and survival. Survival through sweet foods, energy dense, a good source of energy and safe, dense fatty foods, and salty to conserve our fluids for survival. Okay. Today, these flavors are unnaturally concentrated in foods, which is stripped of valuable nutrition. Therefore, we have food with no breaks, supernormally stimulating, carbohydrately dense, especially important for the vegetarians over here who are listening. The carbohydrate dense foods are often just as food with no breaks as, fatty or other foods, okay, salty foods. So carb dense foods, especially the salty ones. You may say, okay, I don't have a sweet tooth, but I'm eating a snack of khakra every morning with my tea. So that is an example of a carbohydrately dense, nutrient poor food. You may say, okay, but it's made out of wheat. But think about what processing the wheat has gone through to end up into that final product of the khakra. How long can it be preserved? Where is it coming from? How are you sourcing it? How often are you eating complete protein meals to even justify eating that khakra? How much self-control do you have to use to stop eating only one or two, whereas your brain tells you I could eat 10, okay? Because it's actually calorie dense, but nutrient poor. So the nutrient poor foods with all the pleasure and reward signals that keep us from overeating, but none of the satiety signals that tell us to stop. Again, low fat vegetarian snacks, I feel, are the biggest culprit, because at least the fat, even if it is fat which is coming from butter or ghee, at least it is producing a hormonal response of satiety through ghrelin. At least it's telling our brain, okay, I'm full. But the low fat carb dense snacks are the worst, because they are the foods with no breaks. Even if they are not sweet, even if they are salty, they are a great example of food with no breaks. These are the foods that rewire our signals, reward, pleasure, emotional pathways, promote hard to resist cravings. We begin to associate these foods with memories, So for example, you'll say, oh, I loved noodles, when I grew up on Maggi noodles. And suddenly Maggi noodles are like this emotional stress reliever after a really long day. Or you're going on a picnic, you're going on a very, fitness driven day trek where you have walked 15,000 steps and you want to reward yourself with hot Maggi noodles. So this is an example of food which is not giving you satiety, but because it's associated to emotions, reward, pleasure signals from childhood, memory, etc., you are likely to indulge in them. Stress, inadequate sleep only reinforce these patterns. So students are much more likely to indulge in these kind of processed foods like 2-minute noodles or cookies or waffles or, any of these kind of quick go-to cheese toasts, etc. Reconnecting delicious, rewarding food with the nutrition and satiety that nature intended is the key to changing these habits. I'm going to stop share over here.